Hello, everyone, and welcome on into the first of a nine video series that I'm doing, going over the current CFL teams and taking a look at their history. What has happened to these CFL teams? How did they start? How are they doing now? I thought it would be an interesting video series to start off with. Stay tuned to the channel as I will be doing other history videos for other sports as well with an NHL video coming out in the next couple of days as well. So make sure to stay tuned into that. But we will start this video off uh, by talking about the Edmonton Elks. So the Edmonton Elks started out as the Edmonton Eskimos. That was their name for a good portion of their history. They were known as the Edmonton Eskimos. They joined the league in 1949 and joined the Western Interprovincial Football Union. It was kind of three separate leagues at that point. This is before the actual CFL began. Edmonton joined the league, finished 4-10-0, and missed the playoffs in their first season. Going ahead to year two, finished third in the league, 7-7, and went to the division finals, where they lost a 2-1 series against the Winnipeg Blue Bombers in 1951. Uh, Edmonton improved a little bit, going 8-6. Once again, losing in the division finals. This time, 2-1 series loss against the Saskatchewan Roughriders in 1952. 9-6-1. So we're seeing slight increases here over their first few years, but the Edmonton Eskimos are able to make it to the Grey Cup championship, where they lose to Toronto, the Toronto Argonauts 21-11 that year. But 1953, the first really good season the Edmonton Elks have. They go 12-4. However, lose in the first round to the Winnipeg Blue Bombers in 1953. But 1954, Edmonton goes 11-5, and they win their first Grey Cup against the Montreal Alouettes, the first of three consecutive Grey Cup wins, all against the same team, which is really interesting and must have created a huge rivalry between those two teams. But in 1954, Edmonton wins their first Grey Cup. They were trailing 26-25 halfway throughout the fourth quarter. This game in 1954 is known as one of the best Grey Cup finals ever. But there was a bit of controversy. Montreal fans believed that their quarterback, Chuck Hunsinger, didn't fumble the ball, but it was a forward pass. It should have been called incomplete pass, but it was not. It was called a fumble, and it did help Edmonton score one of their touchdowns, which, of course, they scored two touchdowns in the fourth quarter to end up winning the Grey Cup in 1954. In 1955, the Edmonton Elks Eskimos finished 14-2, the best record in the CFL, but it wasn't the CFL quite yet. In 1955, in 1956, Edmonton wins the Grey Cup once again, 50-27. The final score against the Montreal Alouettes, once again having the best record in Canadian football at that time. In 1957, Edmonton once again finishes 14-2. They had 475 points for, 142 points against that year. So just a monster team, 14-2 regular season. However, they lost the 2-1 series in the division finals to the Winnipeg Blue Bombers that year. So their Grey Cup streak ended at 3 years. In 1958, Edmonton goes 9-6-1, and that is when the CFL is officially formed in 1958. In 1959, Edmonton goes 10-6, losing a 2-0 series against the Winnipeg Blue Bombers after they had beat the BC Lions 2-0 in the previous series. In 1960, Edmonton beats Calgary and Winnipeg before going to the Grey Cup finals, and they lost to the Ottawa Rough Riders 16-6 in that game against the Ottawa Rough Riders. We will get to Ottawa and Saskatchewan. Um, yes, there were two teams in the league at that time called the Rough Riders. Ottawa were Ottawa Rough Space Riders, and then Saskatchewan was Rough Riders, which was one word. So it was an um, interesting time at that point to have two teams named the same. In 1961, Edmonton loses a points series to Calgary, 27-26. So they played two games, and whoever got the most points, um, whoever won the points battle in those two games total, won that series. So it was a 27-26 total. So Calgary went on. The CFL split into two conferences this year. Edmonton was in the Western Football Conference in 1961. But we will head on and see what happens in 1962. So in 1962, Edmonton finishes 6-9-1, um, missing the playoffs. It was the first of a rough go for the Edmonton Elks. In 1963, Edmonton finished 2-14, 220 points for, 425 points against, and not one player in 1963 from the Edmonton Eskimos made it to either All Star game, the Western Division All Star game, or um, the CFL All Star game. No Edmonton player was invited to the CFL, those All Star games. That's how bad that team was in 1963. In 1964, Edmonton finishes 4-12, ahead of the Winnipeg Blue Bombers, who finished 1-14-1. Despite Winnipeg scoring 48 more points and allowing 61 fewer points than Edmonton that year, Winnipeg finished 1-14-1, and Edmonton finished 4-12. So it was a bit of luck there for Edmonton, despite being the worst team. If you look at points differential. In 1965, 5-11 season, so a slight improvement from the year before. Once again, missing the playoffs. In 1966, a little bit more of an improvement, finishing 6-9-1, making it to the playoffs, losing 16-8 to the Winnipeg Blue Bombers. Winnipeg and Edmonton definitely had a big rivalry uh, back in the day. Looking at their history here, I would think that they definitely had a big rivalry against the Winnipeg Blue Bombers, Montreal as well, and then we'll get to Calgary here in the future. 1966, 1967, 9-6-1. They lost 21-5 to Saskatchewan in the first round. 1968, they lost 29-13 to Calgary in the first round, going 8-7-1 that year. In 1969, they finished 5-11, missing the playoffs. 241 points for, 246 points against. So they only allowed 5 more points that year than they scored, yet they finished 5-11. So they had some blowout losses for sure in those. They had some close games and some big wins in that series in that year. In 1970, finishing 9-7, they lost to Calgary 16-9. So we're starting to hear Calgary a bit more, Calgary's name. Um, at this time. In 1971, um, Edmonton missed the playoffs, going 6-10-0, and it would be a while before Edmonton would miss the playoffs again after that time. In 1972, their first year making the playoffs again, they finished 10-6, losing the first round to Saskatchewan, an 8-6 final total. And then we'll see what happens next. So the dynasty begins for the Edmonton Elks, um, and it starts really here in 1973, facing the Ottawa Rough Riders, finishing in second place, losing 22-18 to the Ottawa Rough Riders. And Ottawa was a tough team for Edmonton. They'd have already lost against Ottawa Rough Riders twice at this time. Uh, at this time in 1973, they had lost twice to Ottawa Rough Riders in the Grey Cup that year. 1974, 10-5-1 record, finishing in second place against the Montreal Alouettes. And why I said earlier, um, the Edmonton Eskimos and the Montreal Alouettes having a big rivalry, is because they faced each other a lot in the Grey Cup. And 1974, the Edmonton Eskimos finished second, but in 1975, they beat Montreal 9-8 to win the Grey Cup that year. So another 1 point victory that year. 1976, they finished 9-6-1. They lost 23-13 to the Saskatchewan Roughriders in the division finals that year. And if you look 3 years before that, and the next 6 years after that, they made the Grey Cup. So there was just that one game against Saskatchewan Roughriders in 1976 in the playoffs. Edmonton was able to win that one. Saskatchewan won that game. And that was the only time in that period where Edmonton failed to make the Grey Cup. In 1977, once again facing the Montreal Alouettes, they lost 41-6 that year. In 1978, the first of 5 consecutive championships for the Edmonton Eskimos. They won. They finished 10-4-2, winning 20-13 against Montreal. In 1979, 12-2-2 season, winning 17-9 against the Montreal Alouettes. In 1980, 13-3-0 season. They beat the Hamilton Tiger Cats to win the Grey Cup that year. Edmonton had 505 points for, 284 points against. The next closest team had 407 points for, 351 points against. So Edmonton clearly had the best team that year, beat Hamilton 48-10 that year to win the Grey Cup. And in 1981, in 1981, they faced the Ottawa Rough Riders. Edmonton had a 14-1-1 season, 14 wins, 1 loss, 1 tie. They made it to the Grey Cup, faced Ottawa, and Edmonton won 26-23. So a 3-point win against the Ottawa Rough Riders. Ottawa that year finished 5-11, 306 points for, 446 points against. So this Ottawa team was bad, and they made the playoffs because only 2 teams missed the playoffs at that time in the league. So Ottawa made it despite being 5-11, and were a field goal away from tying that game up, despite Edmonton going 14-1-1. So that was a crazy year. As I said, Ottawa Rough Riders were not a good matchup for the Edmonton Eskimos in their history. In 1982, their final of their 5th Grey Cup win in that stretch. Facing the Toronto Argonauts, they won 32-16. In 1983, they lost in the first round to Winnipeg, 49-22. In 1984, they once again lost in the first round to Winnipeg, 49-22. Or sorry, in 1984, 55-20 in 1984. In 1985, once again, losing to Winnipeg, 22-15. And in 1986, they got out of the first round, didn't have to worry about losing to Winnipeg. They finished second to the Hamilton Tiger Cats that year. Hamilton finished 9-8-1, and Edmonton was 13-4-1. But the Tiger Cats were able to win the Grey Cup that year. In 1987, after finishing in second place the year before, Edmonton goes 11-7, so they take a step back in the regular season, but it doesn't matter. They go to the Grey Cup against Toronto Argonauts, and they won 38-36. So it was a close game with a 2-point victory there. Edmonton had 617 points for 462 points against that year. They had a great team. In 1988, Edmonton finishes 11-7, losing to the BC Lions in the division finals. In 1989, Edmonton goes 16-2 that year, and they lost to Saskatchewan 32-21. Saskatchewan then went on to win the Grey Cup that year. And we will see what happens next. So in 1990, Edmonton faces Winnipeg and finishes and comes in second place in 1990. Winnipeg that year had a really, really good defense. Winnipeg allowed 112 fewer points than Edmonton that regular season, and Edmonton was the next closest team. So Edmonton allowed the second fewest points. Winnipeg allowed the fewest points that year, 112 fewer points than Edmonton. So that Winnipeg defense was not fun to play against, and Edmonton had no success. They went to the Grey Cup. Winnipeg won 50-11 that year, so it was a rough go for Edmonton in 1990. In 1991, Edmonton loses 38-36 to Calgary in the division finals. In 1992, Edmonton loses 23-22 to Calgary in the division finals. Calgary goes on to win the Grey Cup. So another 1-point loss, and then watching their same province division rival go and win the Grey Cup that year. 1993, Edmonton finishes 12-6. They win the Grey Cup against Edmonton, 33-23. In 1994, 13-5 season, they lose in the first round to BC, 24-23. In 1995, it's another 13-5 season. Edmonton loses to Calgary, 37-4 that year in the division finals. In 1996, Edmonton finishes 11-7, so a step back, but they go to the Grey Cup. Unfortunately, losing to Toronto that year, 43-37. In 1997, they finished 12-6, lose in the division finals to Saskatchewan, 31-30. Another 1-point loss. In 1998, Edmonton finishes 9-9. So for the first time in a long time, they don't have a winning record. It's an even record there, and they finish. They lose to Calgary 33-10 that year, finishing 9-9, but had 396 points for, 450 points against. So the signs that the dynasty might have been ending might have started there in 1998. 1999, Edmonton finishes 6-12, but they still make the playoffs, losing in the first round to Calgary, 30-17, improving their points for to 459, 502 against that year. In 2000, once again losing in the first round, this time to BC Lions, they lost 34-32. 527 points for, 520 points against that year. In 2001, another 9-9 season, losing in the division finals to Calgary, 34-16 that year. And Edmonton won the division at 9-9. So that was a bad West division in the early 2000s. In 2002, um, Edmonton finishes 13-5, finishing in second place to the Montreal Alouettes, losing 25-16. In 2003, they get revenge from the year before, finishing 13-5 again, this time winning the Grey Cup, 34-22 against the Montreal Alouettes. In 2004, another 9-9 season, losing in the first round to the Saskatchewan Roughriders, 14-6. And in 2005, Edmonton wins their next Grey Cup, 38-35 in overtime against the Montreal Alouettes that year. And we will see what happens next. So that was the end of the dynasty. The dynasty ended in 2005. In 2006, for the first time since 1971, so 34 years, Edmonton missed the playoffs that year in 2006. 2007, it got worse. They finished 5-12-1, once again missing the playoffs. In 2008, they rebounded there, finishing 10-8, going to the division finals, facing Montreal, losing 36-26. In 2009, they finished 9-9, lost in the first round to the Calgary Stampeders, 24-21. In 2010, Edmonton finished 7-11, once again missing the playoffs. In 2011, finished 11-7, winning the division finals. Losing the division finals against BC, 40-23. BC won the cup that year. In 2012, another 7-11 season, losing the first round to Toronto, 42-26. In 2013, a rough season, 4-14, missing the playoffs. In 2014, Edmonton finished 12-6. They and Calgary were the top two teams in the CFL. And Calgary beat Edmonton 43-18 on their way to winning the Grey Cup. It was a rough year, a rough result for Edmonton that year. In 2015, Edmonton finished 14-4, winning the Grey Cup finally against the Ottawa Red Blacks. In that year, 26-20 win. In 2016, 10-8 season, and they lost 35-23 to Ottawa, who won their Grey Cup. So Ottawa missed out in 2015 against Edmonton, but got their revenge on their way to a Grey Cup in 2016. In 2017, Edmonton finished the season 12-6 on a 5-game winning streak, but they lost to their division rivals Calgary Stampeders 32-28. In 2018, a 9-9 season, a 9-9 record, but this time it was a very good West Division. They missed the playoffs there, finishing 9-9. And in 2019, Edmonton finished 8-10, losing in the division finals to Hamilton. This season, 2019, was the last time Edmonton has won a home game going into recent years, which we will. So that brings us to the most recent years, the last 4 seasons. In 2020, there was no CFL season due to COVID-19. The CFL just decided not to have a season that year. Um, During that season, Edmonton announced that they were no longer going to be the Edmonton Eskimos. They were going to be the Edmonton football team and then EE football team. And when they announced that it was EE football team, that hinted that they would once again be Edmonton with a nickname that ends in E. And after a um, decision, they ended up with the Edmonton Elks as their team name in 2021, finishing 3-11. So the first of the next 3 seasons, unless they have a magical comeback here in 2023 of a rough seasons. In 2022, so in 2022 or 2021, sorry, they have finished with 246 points for, 377 points against. Last year in 2022, 4 wins, 14 losses, 354 points for, but 599 points against. They just decided screw defense, and they allowed 124 points more than any other team. The next closest team to them was the Ottawa Red Blacks. And that brings us to 2023. And the Edmonton Elks are currently 0-6 and off to another rough season. But that is the video, the first of a few videos with the CFL. I'll be honest, I'm new to watching the CFL. I just started watching around 2019, more heavily the last couple seasons. So I've basically gone through the results year by year, maybe not as in depth, just because I don't know a lot of those players back in the day. So um, I've done what I can here. I hope you enjoyed the video going through the Edmonton Eskimos and Elks history. If you're new to the channel, hit that subscribe button. It really helps out a lot. Stay tuned. There will be betting shows as well. So the channel is now a betting show as well as a history show, as I will take a look at different teams' histories. Expect a little bit more in depth, a little bit more player um, information when we get to the hockey videos. But for the CFL, basically looking at how teams have done over their history and how they've done in the playoffs. But I hope you enjoyed the video. Thanks a lot, guys.